So, a very big welcome to you all to today. And this is our first in the new series of conversations called Interview with an Educator. Interview with an Educator is a series of everyday conversations with everyday teachers, educators, and parents, just so that we can have very practical, down to earth conversations about what it's really like raising and educating children today. Today, we're going to be interviewing Cathy Nelson, who is based in 29 Palms in California, and she is running for the school board. Cathy, I'm really excited to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Priya. I'm looking forward to the opportunity. It's good to be here.
Thank you. So perhaps you could just share a little bit about yourself. Who is Cathy Nelson?
Well, I am a 21-year resident of California. I have a master's in holistic integrative education. I taught school for 21 years here in California, and I recently retired. And I still want to be involved with education, so that is why I'm running for our local school board.
Great. And why do you want to be a school board member?
I think it's just a continuation of service. As teachers, we feel often that we are called to the profession, and I feel that my calling is not ending, and I'm taking it to the next level, working within our community, with families, with teachers, with other board members to continue providing education services and learning opportunities for students in our area.
And so you were a teacher for 21 years. That's a tremendous amount of dedication to education. What some of your experiences in public education been like?
As a teacher, there was never a year that was like the other. I mean, every year was different because you're getting a new group of students. There were some teachers that choose to leave their bulletin boards up, or they fall into the system of, every year their lessons are the same. I could never do that because my students came first, and they were each year they were different. I taught, sixth grade, third grade, fourth grade, and kindergarten during my time at 29 Palms Elementary School. And no 2 years were the same. Every year was different. When I retired, I pulled out, I kept all my plan books that I had. So I would have had 21 years of planning books,
Wow.
lesson plan books. And I looked at them, and no 2 years were the same. So that's really was an exciting part of teaching, was the fact that every year brought a new adventure, every year. So that's some of my experiences in education.
I really love that. I remember I was talking to a teacher in a Waldorf school actually, and they were saying that over the previous 10 years that they had seen such a huge difference in children entering into the classroom, and that there was an increase in learning difficulties. And so the way one might have taught 10 years previously was actually no longer relevant. So what you're sharing feels really poignant, because of course you're really meeting children where they're at in this moment and in this climate.
Yes, and then there was also, a change, at least in the United States, with the understanding of education. And, different organizations decided that the easy mark was to blame teachers for what was happening in education. So that changed a lot of people's perspective of what education was. And I mean, it used to be, when I was a child growing up in school, if the teacher told my parents something, that was it. They believed the teacher. They felt the teacher had my best interests in mind. And now that's changed a little bit, where teachers are constantly struggling to be the force that they can be and need to be in society. And it's not on teachers, so to speak, but it's a change in the climate of how teachers are looked at and how school is looked at. So that's been really interesting to watch over the years, how that changed.
Do you think there's more pressure on teachers to be the kind of be all and end all for children?
I think there is, but it's also not so much be all end all. It's let's be successful with these tests that we've created so that these children look like they are proceeding as they're supposed to proceed by the definition of those groups that are not in the classroom. So that's really difficult for a teacher sometimes, because you see the differences in how education can go, and yet the system tells you to do something one way. So that's very, very difficult.
Yeah, actually, speaking to a lot of teachers generally, there is a lot of heartbreak because the passion that they go into the profession in the first place is often not given space when they've got to kind of teach to the test and everything becomes very standardized.
Yes, and that's another point too, is that the standardization of education with the test is one thing, and doing assessments is another. As a teacher, I was constantly assessing my students because that taught me how to do my lessons continually through through the week. So if you're assessing, you're looking at where a child is and where can you take them, with the next lesson, what they may need to understand. Like say in math, say you have a student who's not understanding how to add. Well, that tells you need to go back and you need to be reteaching those lessons to that student. Well, at the same time, there might be some kids that do know how to add, so you take them to the next level. With standardization, if that child doesn't know how to add, sometimes teachers are left with, I can't go back. And I never felt that pressure myself because there was always a way to get the system to work for me versus me always working for the system. So I think that's difficult for some teachers, is to understand there are ways that you can get back there and work with that child instead of keeping going with how the guide says you're supposed to go. And that's one thing that I really find interesting is we call them teaching guides, but they become something more. They become saying you need to be on the same page with everybody else every day. And there's no way humanly possible to do that if you are really meeting the needs of the students in your classroom.
Because, real children don't all learn at the same pace,
No.
do they? No.
They don't, and that's the I taught kindergarten the last 7 years in education, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And what I always remember what a friend of the family told me. He said, "Oh, he says I love the younger grades because you see such an amount of growth in them in a year's time," and he was absolutely correct. But the problem was that if I would have stuck with where these students were supposed to be at, instead of just letting them go at their pace. I mean, I had students that in March still were managing to just learn how to write their names, just to learn how to do their ABCs. They weren't ready to be reading yet, but it took that patience to work with them to see that growth. And it may not have been the same. That's the other thing, growth in children, we can't standardize it. We like to think we can force maturation on children, but we can't. They're all going to mature at their level, and nobody has figured out how to get it standardized. If they did, all of us would be millionaires because we would have figured out how to do that and sold it to somebody to be able to do it. So parents and teachers need to understand that children are not going to fit into a box. They're each going to develop at their own pace. And we need to be brave as teachers to keep telling the public, look, children grow at their own pace.
Well, like adults, because of course we continue to learn and grow, at our own pace through life as it continues. I often think of children like, little seeds in a garden, all blossoming into different flowers, and each flower is going to look different. It's going to have different attributes, and even the same set of flowers, like sunflowers, grow different shapes and sizes and at different paces. So why would we expect children to be any different, really?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. As adults, we continue to do things differently. Why in the world are we trying to put children in a box and standardize their education? And that's something that every nation is going to have to face now with what we've gone through with COVID-19. How are we going to change education to meet the needs of students? It's a real opportunity to start looking differently at education.
I feel like that should almost be a central question. How are we going to change the needs of education to meet children, pupils, where they are right now?
And part of it is getting rid of the standardization. And I know, unfortunately, a lot of funding is tied to test scores and such that we are required to give, or we're required to give. We need to free ourselves from that. And we also need to start looking at teachers as a true profession and give teachers the classroom back. Allow them to do their teaching in the classroom. Like one of the thoughts I've had with young teachers is, and somebody told me this too, is they said, don't become an expert in everything in your first year. You grow with your subject matter as well. Like, say you have to teach in elementary school, we teach all subjects. If you're strong in math, if you want to start out with that, with mastering math and teaching it with children, focus on that. The next year, add on language arts. The next year, add on the other subjects that you're responsible for. Don't think you have to do everything all at once. And the other thing is to bring your passion into the classroom. Don't leave it at the front door. When you walk into that classroom, students need to know that you're excited about something. For me, it was photography. I live in an area where it's very easy to go out and take pictures of nature, and then I would do nature photographs and then write poetry that went along with those. And somebody said, well, why aren't you doing that in the classroom? And I said, well, at first I thought, no, I can't teach the camera because I go out and it's just something for me that's just a time. I couldn't tell you f-stops. I couldn't tell you, the different things about the camera. But my pictures came out really, really nice. So I started doing that with my kids. And we had a day where I brought in at that time, there were these disposable cameras that we could use. And the kids, I said, okay, guys, we're going to do this. You're going to go out during our lesson. Don't interrupt what we're doing as a whole group, but each of you is going to get a chance. Go out, take 3 or 4 pictures of something around the campus. We'll come back in. I'll get those pictures. At that time, we used the word developed, and then we'll write about them. And this is a group of 4th graders. I think I had anywhere from 27 to 30 kids in the classroom. And we went out, and it was seamless. I was stunned. It was completely seamless. Every child had a chance to take their photographs. Every child had their photographs developed. Every child wrote poetry. Every child wrote about what they learned about themselves through the experience. And it was because I was willing to take a risk with my passion. I didn't leave it at the front door. I brought it in and I taught kids, the basics of photography, but then the rest was up to them. And they had some incredible pictures of what they saw on the playground. And their poetry was just as incredible. And after that time frame, I'd have kids coming in with their parents. I remember one time, a parent came in with her camera or her phone, and she said, I have to show you this. We were out last night. My daughter said, oh, we've got to show this to Ms. Nelson. We've got to show her what we did with the phone camera. And they came in, they were out taking pictures of the sunset, and they were beautiful pictures. So it went to another level. It went to something where they kept going with it. And the interesting thing about that is my last year of teaching, this young adult walked into my classroom and with my principal, and she said, do you remember who this is? And I looked at the student and I went, oh my gosh, it is. And I named her, and I had her, she was that 4th grade student.
Wow.
She was the student that I had in 4th grade that, had the picture with her mom, and she came back in as a young adult. She's now married. She's now, very happy with what she's doing, but she remembered me and wanted to come and see me in the classroom. And that was just an incredible experience. So as teachers, we need to remember we don't know the full impact we have on children. And they do come back. They will come back and see you, or they will remember you.
It's such a poignant story. And it kind of reminds me that, at the heart of learning and education is relationship, and that relationship of that young girl with you was obviously really very precious and important to her. And so much so that she had come back. I just wondered, I know we've spoken a little bit about, a challenge in education, like the standardization. Do you think that relationships are prioritized enough in schools today?
Today, no. I don't think it is. I don't think they are. And teachers need to remember that, I would always tell parents that, you are the most important person in your child's life. You may not realize that all the time, but you are. And teachers rate pretty high up there too. And you need to be willing to, like when I taught kindergarten, there were days I would go home and I'm like, oh my gosh, was I able to talk to so-and-so today? Was I able to call them by name? So I would change my approach when we walk in the classroom. Some days I would greet each of them when they came in by name, And I made sure to walk around the room and either touch them on the shoulder or say their name in the classroom. It's so important. You don't know the impact you're going to have on children. And if they feel ignored, if they feel like they're not recognized, you're not going to get them to really develop the way that they could develop if you had that relationship with them. And I say that not to put pressure on teachers, because I know there are so many other pieces out there. But I think if you had that relationship with students, I think you would be surprised at how easily other things would happen in the classroom. If the students grow to trust you, again, one of my last years of teaching in kindergarten, I made art a priority. I never thought of myself as an artist growing up. And I still draw stick figures, for my people. I haven't learned, the whole thing there. But I intentionally brought art into the classroom. And a lot of the art was the kids creating, self-portraits or doing things, by themselves. And their work, I remember one, we had this, they did self-portraits. And one of my little guys drew himself, and of course they were allowed to put a crown on their head if they wanted to, and they could put jewels on the picture, and when you're dealing with kindergartners and glue, I'd hang it up on the wall, and the glue was just running off the page, and it was, that was just kindergarten. And I looked at one little guy's picture, and he had drawn himself, at that age, they're not really drawing things to scale yet. The head might have been the biggest thing, which is natural, for that age. So he had drawn himself, he had his crown on there, and then on the bottom of his picture, he had drawn out his 10 little toes. It was obvious he had his 10 little toes on the picture, and I thought, that's him. That's his personality coming out in that picture. And that was the year I had parents saying, do you have any other art that's coming home? And it was art that they were allowed to express themselves. And through that expression, it built us as a classroom. They knew that I had this certain shirt that I would wear. And I said, if I wear this shirt to school, guys, we're doing art. And sometimes I was so excited about art projects, I'd have to wear the shirt 2 or 3 times a week. But I thought, you know what? We're doing art. So, and the kids got used to that. They'd see me in the morning on the playground. And they say, we're going to do art today. And I said, yes, we are. And I think they loved it because sometimes we had forms that they, styles that we wanted them to do, but it was them. It was them expressing themselves. And it was incredible. It was beautiful what they came up with for themselves. So, don't forget that when you're dealing with students. Allow them to find a way for them to express themselves, either through art, through writing, through play, when they play together. There are ways that kids want to express themselves.
Here in the UK, governments are constantly slashing budgets for arts funding in schools. What's it like where you are?
We have no, at least in the community I am in, some schools might have spot, art programs. We have no set budget for art. So as a teacher, I was pretty much responsible to find that and to bring the supplies in. We did do, at our site, a school-wide art extravaganza, is what we called it. And I went on one of the teacher websites that would provide funding for it. And I had listed all the supplies that we need. This is school-wide. This was for 600 plus students that we were going to do this project. And I put it on this funding source. And within a week, at the max 2 weeks, we had our full funding.
Wow.
So people believed in what we were doing, and we got the supplies, and we had them out to classes. And it was at least a week, if not 2 weeks, the teachers had to do their art projects. We based it on standards, so people couldn't say, well, you're wasting class time doing these projects. We based it on standards. And the artwork, and then we had a place where we displayed it. And then we had community members come in, local community artists come in, and we had a juried show. So we had all these local artists in, looking at the kids' work and deciding. We had first, second, third place. But the fact of the matter is we had over 600 kids creating their own art.
Wow.
And it was displayed for them. So we had to come up with our own way of doing that. And we had to, number one, we based it on the standards. Secondly, we found a funding source to get our supplies that we could have. And then we had teachers that were in agreement. The whole school was in agreement that we were going to focus on this and get this up. And the displays were incredible. And the judges that came in, they were just delighted with the work the students had done. So that was an incredible time. So as far as arts funding, no, it's about the same thing here. You have to be creative in how to get that in the classroom. And for me, that was really frustrating on the one hand, because I saw the value in those kids being able to express themselves. They felt ownership of their work, and therefore they felt ownership a little bit more of their education as well. So
wow, I love that. And I really love what you shared about, even though there wasn't the funding, that you found ways of making it work, and, that kind of creative way of making it work. And actually that's kind of connecting to the wider community, inviting in local artists. I mean, that must have been such a rich exchange, not just for the pupils, but also, all those others who got involved, the artists and all the people who contributed to the fundraising, and the fact that your whole school were on board. That must have felt really quite profound and a big moment in the life of your school.
it was incredible. And then we had students designed folders for all our judges. So the judges were given a folder that had student art on the front and the back of this regular little folder. And I bring that up because I was just out hiking a few weeks ago, and I ran into these gentlemen who were looking at Dall sheep, or bighorn sheep, the same way I was. And the gentleman started talking, and I said to myself, I know him from somewhere. How do I know him? I said, I know you. You're so-and-so. You were involved with our art project that we did. You were one of the judges at our art project. And he says, yes. He says, I still use that folder.
Wow.
That was like 2 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was like, holy cow, the impact we had, with that little time frame of working with that, it has gone on.
It just shows the power of art, doesn't it? And the power of creativity to touch and connect people, across ages and different. Yeah, I mean, it's just extraordinary, really.
It really was. And then we had, the fun part too was watching people come together. Like fifth grade did shadow boxes. And we had a couple at the school. One of them was an employee at the time. She and her husband, and then our principal, they built shadow boxes for our entire fifth grade. So you're talking at least 90 shadow boxes that these people put together, for kids. And the stuff the kids brought in to put in those shadow boxes to express who they are, who they were, probably still are, it was amazing to watch. It was amazing to watch the art unfold. And our sixth graders did self-portraits a certain way. And just watching them unfold with those was astounding. And our kindergartners, we even did self-portraits with our kindergartners. And what they came up with it was incredible. We laminated them, we had them up, so then when they were done, they could take those home. And that's a keepsake. Those shadow boxes, we told the kids, you get to keep these. So that's a keepsake. That's a memory they have of something, a time that really recognized who they were. Not just what they were doing, but who they were as individuals.
It's beautiful. And what do you think some of the key challenges are facing schools today?
Well, I think what's going to happen here, going back into the regular classroom, as the United States is all over the place with how it's opening schools and what it's allowing to happen. The key is going to be getting students back in and getting them interested in learning in the classroom. And I say that on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm thinking, no, they're going to be jumping for joy being able to relate to their peers again in person. And I think the school system's going to have to decide, what are we going to focus on? Number one, I still think we need a distance learning thread for those students who families have decided, this is really the way that my child learns best. The second one is going to be the whole safety aspect. How are we going to make our classrooms safe for students to really be in the classroom for the length of time we're asking them? And then the third thing really is a review of our curriculum. What are we doing that's really going to get these kids excited about learning again? And taking away some of the standardization that we've grown to expect within the system. Let's get some place-based learning in there. Let's get some more outdoor education in there for our students. Let's make it child-centered. What is that going to look like? And number one, that's going to mean believing students and believing their learning pace. And the second thing is really believing teachers, allowing teachers to teach. I don't have to be on the same page as my colleague who's next door to me. I'm reaching my students because I know where they are at. That's going to be huge. That's going to be a huge change that education really needs to look at and say, let's trust our teachers again. And teachers need to step up to the plate too and say, hey, you know what? This is a real opportunity for me. This is a chance for me to really teach versus following a guide or being on the same page as somebody else. How do I bring my personality in? Because I remember one of my first education classes was you teach who you are. Okay, so how are you going to bring that back in within the standardization? How are you going to bring that back in to celebrate education instead of saying students are failing? You know, we need to get rid of this idea of an achievement gap and look at it as an opportunity gap. Students have not been given the same opportunities. It doesn't mean that they're not achieving as much. It just means they haven't been given the same opportunities that say, you know, like we always talk about inner city schools here in the United States. You know, are we giving them the same opportunities that say these other schools out in the suburbs have, that have the funding, that have the ability to do that? Do all students start on the same are they all equal when they're starting out with funding? And if they're not, you know, we've got to change that so that they are. Give them those same opportunities that everybody else has.
So making education equitable. I mean, that feels so important, doesn't it, globally for education?
Yes, it really is. I mean, you know, because I mean, I just look at that with I had one student that came into my classroom. He was a kindergartner, obviously, in one of my last years. And he came in and he had a real chip on his shoulder. He was really, you know, he was a tough child. And you could tell that he was tough because of maybe some other circumstances that school had nothing to do with. And then I started observing him a little bit more closely. And I noticed his shoes. And his shoes were to the point where his toes were coming out and the bottom was almost falling off. And he just, you know, he was not able to be clean when he came to school. And I know for some they would say, well, that's an automatic call because, you know, of neglect for this child. But I took a different approach to that. And I emailed the parent. I had the email for the parent. I said, hey, look, I'm noticing your son, his shoes are in really tough shape. I said, would it be okay if I bought him a pair of shoes? Because you always want to leave the family with dignity. You don't want to take that away from them. You want to leave them with that sense that, okay, this person wants to help me, but they're not stepping into my life and taking over my life. And the parent emailed back and said, yes, you go ahead. You can buy him some new shoes. That would be fine. But I want you to know we're going to be moving again. We're going to be moving back to wherever it was, someplace down south. And so I went out and I bought him a new backpack. I bought him a couple of pairs of new shoes. I bought him clothes. I bought him just a whole bunch of stuff. And I brought it to school and I told the health tech, I said, look, I said, call him into the office, but don't tell him that I'm providing these for him. You know, just say, hey, you know, somebody is providing these for you, but don't tell him it's me because that was not my intent of doing this thing. And so she called him down. She said, hey, let's wash up a little bit in the bathroom, and here's some clothes you can put on, some new shoes. And she talked to me later, and she goes, you know, did you notice how he immediately changed when he had new clothes and new shoes?
Wow.
And he came into the classroom, and he was just a softer individual. He was relaxed. He was laughing. He didn't have that chip on his shoulder. And I was talking to him about it later, and he didn't know that I had provided the supplies for him. I said, wow, I said, this is awesome. I said, you're moving, you get some new clothes, you can go, you know, be in your classroom, your new classroom, you've got your new shoes, you got everything ready. He was a totally different person. He was totally excited, and just he became a real gentle person versus that chip on his shoulder where he knew he was different from everybody else. I think we need to be really aware of that. And how can we meet the needs of children in different ways? They don't all have the same needs, but how do we meet those needs?
I'm really touched by the compassion you are, you know, sharing with this child. I mean, I'm sure that was such a huge moment in his life. And, who knows what kind of positive support and encouragement that created in his world as well, and what he was also then experiencing afterwards.
And it was a real reminder for myself. It was like, you live with the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and they tell you not to do that, but you still do it in your mind. And I thought, I was almost too late with him. I was almost too late with sharing those things with him, and I need to be aware of that. It taught me to be aware a little bit more in the classroom as well as what needs my student might have. Because sometimes we get so caught up in what we're doing to teach that we forget these are individuals that may need a little bit different attention as well. So it was a lesson for me.
Thank you. And what do you think are the opportunities in schools today?
And an opportunity really is to look at, I wrote those down here someplace. I thought, this is a time to change the system and to go back to child-centered, hands-on learning. I look at, at least in the United States, a lot of our kindergarten curriculum right now is those children are expected to read by the time they leave kindergarten. If they're not reading when they get into first grade, they're already behind. And my experience with those kids taught me that we can't force that. And I think we need to look at and reassess what we expect for children at different points in their lives. Go back to their natural development versus saying, oh, we need to do this. And it puts a lot of pressure on parents because I found with some kindergarten parents, they wanted their child in school immediately because they felt they needed to start going at a fast pace. They needed to learn how to read. They needed this, needed this. And I'm like, enjoy your child. These are years you're not going to have again. You're going to look back when your child's 12 and say, man, I wish I was back when he was 5 because he liked me then. You just go.
That's what I feel like with my teenagers who are 18 and 14. I think, wow, I wish I was, back when they wanted to snuggle and curl up with me and thought I was a lovely person rather than,
Yeah, so if we give them those opportunities, I always thought of that, if we give them those opportunities when they're young, they may not act like it when they get to be that 12 to 18 range, but they remember. They know that they are deeply loved. And a lot of times that opportunity to express themselves at home comes only because they know they're loved. Tough love is tough on the adults. It's tougher on the adults than it is on kids. And I think we need to remember that. So going back to these parents, we need to allow parents the freedom to say, my child, well, in the state of California, a school is not required until they're 6 years old. So, these parents need to realize, give your child time to develop. If they're not writing their name right away, if they're not reading, it's okay because your child is maturing at their own rate. And take the pressure off of this. In the United States, we had this thing where we were racing to the top. And we push kids to go to college. We push this, this sense of get going, get going, get going. Well, when they're done, what do we have for them? As a society, what are we preparing these kids for? Elementary school should be a time of exploring, of discovering and figuring out, in essence, who they are. The amazing thing that I find is we have kids graduating from college. I graduated from high school when I was 17, just because of my birth date, where it was. There was no way I was ready to make life decisions. And here I am, I'm supposed to go on to college to make these life decisions. And I think sometimes we push kids to make life decisions that the system's really not equipped for those life decisions. One of the saddest things I find, at least in the university system here in the United States, is a lot of times kids have to declare a major when they're just going into college.
Right.
And by the time they're sophomore, they may decide, well, I want to change my major. Well, they may have to go back and take other classes because those other classes fit under that current major. I think we need to look at that whole system and say, okay, what really is the purpose here? What are we doing this for? And how do we get this child through that they feel they now can be a part of society because we've allowed them those opportunities to change what they're doing in the process of getting there.
Thank you. What do you think you might say with perhaps a young teacher who's struggling right now? What message would you share with them?
I would say take it one day at a time. You don't have to have all the answers. Give yourself grace, and realize that you have a value just because of who you are, not because of what the system is telling you. And don't forget your passion. You may feel that you're locked into a system of having to teach a certain way or having to do certain things. Find a way to sneak your passion in there. And I think you'll find that you'll be happier and your students will be happier too. Just don't forget you. And also, be willing to listen to those who may have more experience than you do. Because I know we come across as old, but sometimes we've got some pretty good thoughts about how to relate to students and what can be done. Don't write off everybody right away. Trust people around you, and don't go it alone. One of the beauties I had when I was student teaching is I was at a school where every door was open to me at every grade level by the teachers. They would allow me to come in and have conversations with them. I was student teaching, particularly in sixth grade, but I spent time with a second grade teacher. I spent time with a first grade teacher. I spent time with a fifth grade teacher. And they were very open to allowing me to ask my questions and to have that experience. So look for those people around you that you can bring your questions and your concerns to. And don't be afraid of being vulnerable. I know that when I first went into teaching, there were times that I really felt that I had to be on. I had to have all the answers. I had to do everything correctly. There was a whole community around me that was ready to embrace me when I needed what I needed. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of anything right now. The system needs you. You may feel that the system is just there and you're just going through the motions. The system needs you and your creativity. As I've said before, don't forget your passion. Keep it with you. And don't give up. Don't give up.
Wow, there's so much you've shared there that's touching me really deeply. I feel like I'm not a teacher myself, but I'm taking all those messages in also because I think they're, really valuable messages for life. I was just thinking, if you were going to wave a magic wand and could implement just one change in schools or education today, what would it be?
I would get rid of testing.
Wow.
I mean, get rid of the standardization, get rid of the testing. And people confuse assessing and testing. Testing is that game that we play every spring, at least here in the United States. The students have to reach a certain point on this test. It's below, above, and whatever it is, the standard that they set there. Assessing means that when when you're looking at a child, I would have a child that wouldn't be able to write his name when he first came into kindergarten, and I have another child that was writing their name and doing everything that they needed to do. Mm-hmm. So I'd have to take that child that didn't write his name and work with him, a little bit more than the child that didn't know how to write or was already writing their name, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And the fun part is we had an assessment that we used with kindergartners. We called it the Green Book. And it assessed knowing their letters, writing their letters. It assessed everything supposedly that they should know as a kindergarten student that was on their report card that went home. And it was really, for me, it was a blast to give it because we would start with it in September. You'd have kids that wouldn't know their letters, wouldn't know how to write their names. We would assess in November, and they would have grown with their letter writing. They would have grown. And then we'd do it again in the spring. And it was a fantastic tool because I'd look at the students and I'd say, look, back in November, you just knew this many letters. We finished today. You know them all. How exciting is that? And a phrase we had with them is, I don't know it yet. Because they go and they look really downtrodden. I don't know. And I said, no. I said, you don't know it yet. I said, you are going to know that. So that I believe in assessing. I don't believe in standardized testing. It does absolutely nothing for children, for schools. So I would say get rid of standardized testing, allow assessments to continue, and allow teachers to teach. Allow them to teach freely in their classroom. When I first started teaching way back, it was 22 years ago now, our particular district didn't have a lot of science curriculum, and I love science. So I would go out and I would buy all these materials and bring them in and add it to what the district had provided. And it was a blast, So allowing me to teach was really beneficial to myself and to my students. And we need to allow teachers to teach, and we need to free up some of this money so they have what they need in their classroom. We don't want Taj Mahal. We simply want to be able to have the materials we need to effectively teach with our students. So that's my magic wand.
Yeah, I think it's a great magic wand. It's funny, I was sitting in the car with my daughter the other day, who's 14, and she had a friend in the back, and we were driving to school, and they were talking about exam papers and different exam boards. And her friend asked, well, what is an exam board? And I said, well, it's just a different organization who's in charge of that particular test. And my daughter said, yeah, and you have to be careful which exam board it is, because if you learn the question, even if it's the right answer, if you learn it in the wrong way, then you'll get it wrong. And I just thought that that's just so tragic, that actually, already they know that they have to not only answer a question, but they have to answer a question in a prescriptive way in order to get the mark that they need to pass the test.
Yes, and it's, here, the other part of that is that we put kids on a computer now to take the test. You used to be able to write and be able to answer that way. Now they put them on a computer. And to me, that's just destroying their sense of being able to process and being able to think. We've taken away their freedom. And for your daughter to already recognize that at 14 years old, that to me, that's very... it's discouraging on the one hand, and it's just very, very sad that they think that's their education experience.
Oh, yeah.
That I have to, I'm not in school necessarily to learn for myself and about myself. I'm in education to be able to answer this question correctly. How sad is that? At 14.
It is really sad. What do you think is what did I want to ask you? What's the biggest obstacle you've overcome in your life?
I think the biggest obstacle is myself. Because I went into teaching as a second career, so it took me years before I really called myself a teacher, because I didn't.
What were you doing beforehand?
I was in youth ministry. I was within the church system. I still worked with kids, but it was a totally different setting. And during that time, I realized that I wasn't reaching kids the way I really wanted to talk with kids. So I went into teaching after that. And then before that, I worked in an office for several years as a secretary. I started working when I was 15. So, I was working
wow.
I remember that. And I'm real appreciative for all those experiences that I had in life. I don't regret any of them. But the biggest obstacle was myself. And then within that obstacle is I had some major surgery in 2010. And I was out over Thanksgiving, Christmas, which was fantastic because my students, I felt like I had to be there for my kids, that I was so important in their lives, which, is kind of funny now when I look back on that. I am not the center, the students are. But at that time, it was like, I got to get back in the classroom, So I really didn't allow myself enough time to heal. I went back sooner than I should have gone. And it was a couple of years before I really felt well. And then my body decided that, okay, we're not done yet. You have to have more surgery for this incident. And then I was going back, and I'd gone from 6th grade to kindergarten, and we were setting up my classroom, and I had people in helping me because I had just had this previous surgery, and it was like, you can't lift, you can't do this stuff. And I'm like, well, I've set up my classroom, people. I'm teaching kindergarten. I have to have the perfect classroom, when they come in. So I had friends helping me, and I just did not feel good that weekend. They were helping me. And it was Labor Day, and I was very, very ill at home. So I called a friend, and I said, we got to go in. We got to go into the ER. I said, I don't know what's going on with me. And she came over, and she goes, man, you are white, whiter than a sheet. And I said, yeah, let's get down there and find out what's going on. So by the time we got down there and they finished the test with me, my appendix was acting up. So I had to have an appendectomy.
Wow.
And it was like, holy cow. And the doctor came in, he says, you're really lucky. He says, this has been active for some time. You are really lucky that it did not rupture.
Wow.
So I had the surgery. I was in the hospital for about a week, and then I had to go see my doctor for a follow-up. And he says, okay, he said, I can give you a week off, or we can make it so you can have 2 weeks off. What do you want? And my body was just screaming at me, you need to take those 2 weeks. So I did. I took the 2 weeks and just allowed myself to heal. So it was like your body and your mind sometimes, mind constantly communicate with each other, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah,
but, it was communicating with me that, you need to give yourself the healing. You need to heal yourself. So I took the 2 weeks off, and I would obviously had to stay away from the school. I had someone in the class that could teach for me. And I went out and I took pictures. I used that time of grace to be able to relax my body, to go over to a little garden we had in town. I took pictures of butterflies, which was just freeing in so many ways. So the obstacle I had to overcome was allowing myself the times of grace and allowing myself to heal fully. And I think the time frame, first surgery was 2010, the last surgery was like in 2012. My body did not have the time to totally heal. So I had to allow myself the freedom to realize that I needed that time. And it was really interesting because I was in the grocery store right before I was going to go back in the classroom. And I met one of the dads and one of my students there in the store. And I said, well, hey, how's it going? He goes, great. He says, they're looking for you to come back. And I said, wow. I said, I'm going to be back next week. And he looked at his daughter and he said, Miss Nelson's coming back next week. And the child was just grinning from ear to ear, the fact that I would be returning to the classroom. And I came back, I went back, and it was one of the best years I had of teaching. I mean, it was just a joy to be with those kids and to work with them. And the person that I had that taught the class when I was out was fabulous. I mean, she did a fantastic job with the kids. So from that, I learned it's okay to take breaks for yourself. It's okay to love yourself to the point that you say, I need this time. I need to heal. I taught kindergarten for 7 years, and all anybody had to say was the word pink eye, and I would get it, with kindergartners, because they get it all the time. So I had to go through that process of allowing myself to heal. Every time I get that little child illness that as an adult, it really shouldn't have been with me, but it was, because my little darlings were passing it around in the classroom. I had to give myself grace and really allow myself time to heal. So that was an obstacle, a real big obstacle I had to learn. And it was on so many levels. It was social, emotional, intellectually. I had to allow myself the freedom to say, you know what, you need to take a break. You really need to take a break. And that taught me, as I continued with my teaching career, I would take more breaks. Because I was one of those that always said, okay, we're looking at this. The kids need this week. The kids need this. Finally, I just said, you need to give yourself a day off. It's okay to take time off.
I think that's such an important and such a, fundamental part of growing into an adult fully, particularly when raising and taking care of children or educating children, because until we can learn to be a fully healthy, version of ourselves, then we don't have enough to really give to those in our care, whether they're our own children and our families or, in the classroom. And I think that, life often presents us with these opportunities, doesn't it, in which we get to learn those lessons. And and the fact that you had such a profound, joyful year with your children afterwards, it's almost like, there is always a reward for the work that's done on the inside, to heal, and the grace that comes in afterwards.
Yes, and it was the sense of willing to be vulnerable too. Depending on how you've grown up, sometimes vulnerability is seen as a negative, and really it's not. We need to be vulnerable with each other. And I was vulnerable with my children that year in the classroom, and just had a ball with them as their personalities came out and they developed. That was at a time when I was in what we call a portable teaching unit that didn't have a sink in it. So I'm trying to figure out how to do art with kindergartners with no sink. You're like, well, what are we going to do? And very graciously, I had a mom that was constantly in the classroom with me and was a teammate. It wasn't like she was in there just watching for her son. And I had another parent too that same year. So we moved our art lessons closer. We took them outside. They were able to be outside the whole time in a covered area, and a sink was right next door. So we had to manipulate and maneuver how to do that. But I was ready to. I didn't look at that as something that we couldn't overcome. It was something that we were able to do together, and we worked it through because I had given myself that grace, and because I was willing to let other people in, so to speak, to be able to share that time, to share those joys that children were bringing.
I think we're coming to the end of our time together, and I just wanted to say that I've really enjoyed speaking with you. And in fact, I didn't expect that this conversation would be so kind of poignant and touching as I've really experienced it to be. And I feel really, in awe of your kind of tenacity, your courage, your humility, and the deep compassion and care that you've offered your children, your parents and your community, and also, teachers, so many different levels of society in your kind of school environments. And I just think that, you really are exemplifying so many gifts that our schools and education system really need right now. And you clearly have so much experience and a lot of insight and wisdom to share. And although I'm based here in the UK, so I can't vote for you for school board, but I absolutely wholeheartedly would, and would strongly encourage everybody also to do so. I think that you have a lot of compassion and humility, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more and hearing your perspectives on education today. And I just wanted to leave the last words to you. Is there anything else that you want to share with everybody before we close our conversation?
Well, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity for teachers, and the fact that I think as teachers, we need to remember we are storytellers, and we need to keep the story alive. My passion comes out in my stories as I remember back on my students that I've had over the years, and just the experiences with them. And as parents, hang in there. It may seem tough sometimes, but number one, your children love you, and number two, the school system will support you. Sometimes you just have to look at it a different way, but the system is there to support you as well. And enjoy your children. Enjoy your children at the ages that they are. At 5 years old, they're not the same as 11, but my gosh, they have so much to offer you, and you have so much to offer your children. Don't forget that. Each of you is gifted with those children for that reason, to grow together as a part of our society. So again, thank you, Priya. This has been really, I've enjoyed this. I am not one that likes to sit down for interviews, but I'm getting more tonight. I really enjoyed this opportunity. So thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure. I feel really, it's kind of strange. I'm sitting here and I feel so deeply moved. I almost have tears in my eyes, and my heart feels very, just struck by, your journey of being you. And, I know this is just, we've just shared a small less than an hour of a conversation. And of course you have so much life experience that's brought you to this point, but it feels very, I feel very grateful actually to have the opportunity to hear your experiences and the things that have moved and touched you. And I just wish you all the very best for your forthcoming school board nomination. And I'm looking forward to continuing our conversations in the future.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.